Hello, listener. If you're new here, consider subscribing. Let's begin. I never thought I'd die on a cell tower. That's a strange thing to admit, I know, but it's the truth. Before the zombie outbreak changed everything, before the world ended in screams and chaos, I was just a telecommunications technician. My job was simple: climb towers, fix equipment, make sure people could check their Instagram and call their mothers. It was boring work most days, but it paid well enough and kept me outside instead of stuck in some cubicle. The day everything changed started like any other morning in late September. I got the work order around 6 a.m. A remote tower about 40 miles outside the small town of Millbrook needed repairs. Some kind of equipment malfunction was causing dropped calls in the area. Standard stuff. I loaded my truck with tools, emergency supplies, climbing gear, and enough coffee to keep me awake for the 3-hour drive. The tower itself stood on a ridge overlooking a valley, one of those places where you could get coverage for miles around because of the elevation. It was a massive lattice structure, almost 400 feet tall, with maintenance platforms at various heights and a small equipment shelter at the base. The cellular companies shared the tower, which meant there was backup everything: batteries, generators, solar panels on the lower platforms. It was built to stay operational even during power outages. I'd been up this particular tower twice before, once during installation 5 years ago, and again 2 years back for routine maintenance. I knew the climb, knew where every handhold was, knew which platform had the loose bolts that needed tightening. It was familiar territory. What I didn't know was that I'd never leave. The drive up was quiet. Too quiet now that I think about it. I passed maybe 3 other vehicles the entire way. The radio played the usual morning shows, though I remember the host seemed distracted, kept mentioning something about a developing situation overseas. I wasn't really paying attention. The access road was rutted and overgrown, but my truck handled it fine. The gate was unlocked, which wasn't unusual for remote sites. The tower rose above me like a steel skeleton, its red aviation lights dark in the daylight. I could see this small equipment shelter at the base, a prefab metal building about the size of a garden shed, and the generator housing beside it. I did my safety check, inspected my climbing gear, and started the ascent. The first 100 feet were always the hardest psychologically. Your brain keeps reminding you that you're leaving solid ground, that you're trusting your life to cables and carabiners. But I'd done this hundreds of times. The fear becomes background noise after a while. The wind picked up as I climbed higher. At 200 feet, I could see for miles. The valley spread out below, a patchwork of farms and forest, with Millbrook visible as a cluster of buildings to the east. Smoke rose from a few chimneys. Cars moved along the distant highway like toys. Everything looked peaceful, normal, completely unaware of what was coming. I reached the main equipment platform at 280 feet and got to work. The problem turned out to be a faulty power regulator that was causing the backup batteries to drain faster than they should. It wasn't a difficult fix, but it required replacing several components and running diagnostic tests. I figured I'd be up there most of the day. Around noon, I took a break and pulled out my phone to check messages. No signal, which was ironic given where I was standing. The equipment I was repairing handled voice and data, but my personal phone was on a different carrier. I made a mental note to grab lunch from the supplies in my truck once I finished. That's when I heard the first emergency broadcast. I had a portable radio clipped to my belt, tuned to the local emergency services frequency. It was standard safety protocol when working alone on remote sites. The radio crackled to life with a sound I'd never heard before. Pure panic. All units, we have multiple reports of violent attacks throughout downtown Millbrook. Repeat, multiple violent attacks. Victims are extremely aggressive and, Jesus Christ, she just bit him. Unit 3, get back, get back. The transmission dissolved into screaming and static. I froze, my wrench halfway through tightening a bolt. The radio crackled again. A different voice this time, trying desperately to maintain composure. "This is Millbrook Emergency Services broadcasting to all units. We are implementing emergency protocols. Code Red. This is not a drill. Reports of infected individuals attacking civilians. Unknown pathogen. Symptoms include extreme aggression, loss of higher brain function, and static." Then another voice, this one from what sounded like a hospital. "Emergency broadcast to all medical facilities. We are overwhelmed. The infected are spreading faster than we can contain. Bites appear to transmit infection within minutes. Repeat, minutes. Standard containment has failed. Recommend immediate evacuation of all non-essential personnel." I grabbed the radio, my hands shaking. "This is cellular technician David Carter, working at Tower Site 7 outside Millbrook. Can anyone hear me? What's happening down there?" No response. Just more overlapping transmissions, each more desperate than the last. I looked out across the valley toward Millbrook. Even from this distance, I could see something was wrong. More smoke now, too much smoke. And the sounds. I'd never noticed before how sound carried up here. Faint but distinct, I could hear sirens, so many sirens. My first instinct was to get down, get to my truck, and get the hell out. But something made me pause. The transmissions kept coming, painting a picture of total chaos. The words infected and zombie outbreaks started appearing more frequently. I'd always thought those terms were fictional, the stuff of movies and creepypasta stories people shared online. But the fear in those voices was real. I made a decision that probably saved my life. I stayed put and gathered information first. Over the next hour, the emergency broadcasts became more coordinated, but also more desperate. A statewide emergency had been declared. The zombie outbreak wasn't limited to Millbrook. Cities across the region were reporting similar attacks. The infected, and that's what they were calling them now, infected, not zombies, were spreading through population centers at an exponential rate. The symptoms were consistent: extreme aggression, loss of speech and recognition, tendency to bite and attack any uninfected humans on sight. The infection spread through bodily fluids, primarily bites. Once infected, victims termed within 15 to 30 minutes. There was no cure, no treatment, nothing. I watched from my platform as the distant highway became clogged with vehicles. An evacuation was underway, though the broadcasts made it clear that the roads were quickly becoming impassable. Accidents, abandoned cars, and infected attacking refugees created bottlenecks that spread for miles. The sun was starting to descend when I saw the first infected up close. A car came racing up the access road toward the tower, engines screaming, kicking up dust. It was a sedan, driving far too fast for the rough terrain. I watched it fishtail around a curve and slam into a tree about 100 yards from the tower base. The driver's side door opened, and a woman stumbled out. Even from my height, I could see the blood on her shirt. She was followed by 3 other people, if you could still call them people. They moved wrong, jerky and aggressive, making sounds that weren't quite human. The woman screamed and ran toward the tower. The infected followed. I was too high to help, too high to even shout a warning she'd hear. I could only watch as she reached the base of the tower and looked up, her face a mask of terror. She saw me, started waving frantically. "Help me, please, they're right behind me." The infected caught her before she reached the equipment shelter. I won't describe what happened next. Some images burn themselves into your brain, and no amount of time erases them. I turned away, but I couldn't block out the sounds. When I looked again, minutes or hours later, time had stopped making sense. She was gone. Not dead. Gone. She'd gotten back up and walked away with the others, moving in that same jerky, wrong way. 4 infected now instead of 3. That's when the full reality hit me. This was real. the zombie outbreak was actually happening. And I was stuck on a cell tower 400 feet above the ground with limited supplies and no way down that didn't involve walking directly into those things. I spent that first night on the platform, huddled against the equipment housing, listening to the world end. The emergency broadcasts continued through the evening, though they became less frequent and more fragmented. The organized response was collapsing. I heard police departments going silent, fire stations being overrun, hospitals evacuating. By midnight, the official broadcasts had mostly stopped. What remained were scattered civilian transmissions, people calling out on CB radios and emergency frequencies, desperate for help that wasn't coming. One transmission I'll never forget came around 2 a.m. A man's voice, calm but exhausted. "This is a message to anyone still listening. My name is James Wheeler, and I'm broadcasting from what's left of the Millbrook Emergency Operations Center. If you're hearing this, you need to understand that organized rescue is not coming. The government response has failed. The military is overwhelmed. You are on your own. Find a safe haven. Gather emergency supplies. Avoid the infected at all costs. Do not attempt to help those who are bitten. I repeat, do not attempt rescue of infected individuals. They are gone. Survival is all that matters now. This is my last broadcast. Good luck. God help us all." The radio went silent after that, just static and the occasional burst of panicked chatter from other survivors. I took stock of my situation as the sun rose on my second day on the tower. My survival journal, which I started that morning in a small notebook I kept for work notes, laid out the reality. Location: Cell Tower Site 7, approximately 40 miles from Millbrook. Platform at 280 feet. Supplies: limited. I had emergency food in my truck, protein bars, trail mix, some canned goods. Water: 3 bottles in my pack, maybe 2 gallons total in the truck. Tools and equipment: climbing gear, first aid kit, flashlight and batteries. That was it. Shelter: the equipment platform offered some protection from weather, but was completely exposed. The small equipment housing at the base had more supplies, including the backup generator and fuel, but reaching it meant going down to ground level where the infected were. Power: the tower's solar panels and backup batteries were functional. I had the equipment working again, which meant the cell tower was actually operational, not that it mattered much with the networks collapsing. Immediate threats: 4 infected at the base of the tower, possibly more in the surrounding area, no way to descend safely. Long-term threats: starvation, dehydration, exposure, equipment failure, loss of hope. I spent that day observing the infected below and trying to reach anyone on the radio. The infected, I couldn't bring myself to call them zombies yet, seemed to linger near the base of the tower. They'd clearly noticed me the previous day when that woman died. I tested this by dropping a wrench from the platform. All 4 of them immediately converged on where it landed, searching for the source of the sound. They were drawn to noise. That was important information. I also noticed they didn't seem capable of complex problem solving. They paced around the base of the tower but showed no interest in climbing. Whether they couldn't climb or simply didn't understand the concept, I wasn't sure, but it meant the height was protecting me for now. On the 3rd day, I made my first attempt to reach my truck. I'd spent hours planning it. The infected seemed most active during the day, but didn't disappear at night. They just moved slower, responded less quickly to stimuli. My plan was to descend after dark, move quickly to my truck, grab whatever supplies I could carry, and climb back up before they could surround me. It was a terrible plan. I knew it was terrible even as I started down, but I was already rationing my food and water, and the thought of slowly starving to death on that platform was worse than the risk. I made it to about 50 feet above the ground before I realized my mistake. The infected had spread out more than I thought. I could see at least 6 of them now in the moonlight, wandering through the area around the tower. One of them passed directly beneath me, close enough that I could hear the wet, labored sound of its breathing. I froze on the ladder, barely daring to breathe. My hands cramped around the rungs. One of my tools slipped from my belt and fell, clanging against the metal structure before hitting the ground. Every infected in the area converged on the tower within seconds. I scrambled back up as fast as I could, my heart hammering, the ladder shaking under my panic descent. Below me, the infected gathered, reaching upward, making those horrible wet sounds in their throats. I didn't stop until I was back on the main platform, gasping and shaking. My truck might as well have been on the moon. I wasn't getting down. The next week passed in a blur of routine and desperation. I established a survival pattern because the alternative was giving up, and I wasn't ready for that yet. Morning. Check the equipment. The tower was still functional, still broadcasting signal that probably no one was using, but maintaining it gave me purpose. I tested the backup batteries, monitored the solar panels, kept everything running. It was something to do. Midday. Ration food. I was down to 1 protein bar per day and a few sips of water. I'd set up a crude rainwater collection system using a tarp and some empty equipment housings, but it hadn't rained in 5 days. The sky remained stubbornly clear. Afternoon. Monitor radio transmissions. The emergency broadcasts had stopped entirely, but there were still survivors out there. I could hear them occasionally. Brief transmissions from people trying to find each other, warn each other, help each other. I started responding, identifying myself and my location. Maybe someone would answer. Maybe someone could help. Evening. Watch the infected. I'd started keeping detailed notes about their behavior in my survival journal. They were drawn to sound and movement. They showed no interest in non-human animals. I'd watched a deer walk right past a group of them without reaction. They seemed to avoid direct sunlight when possible, staying in shadows during the hottest part of the day. But they didn't sleep. They just existed, waiting. Night. Try not to fall off the platform while sleeping. That last part was harder than it sounds. The equipment platform was maybe 8 feet by 10 feet, crowded with machinery. I'd rigged a safety harness to keep myself from rolling off the edge during the night, but sleep was nearly impossible. The metal was cold, the wind was constant, and the sounds from below never stopped. The infected made noises at night, low moans and wet breathing sounds that carried up through the tower structure. On day 10, it rained. I'd never been so happy to see dark clouds in my life. The storm rolled in during the afternoon, and I scrambled to position every container I had to catch water. The rain was cold and hard, soaking me within minutes, but I didn't care. I tilted my head back and opened my mouth, drinking directly from the sky, feeling water run down my throat for the first time in days. The infected below barely reacted to the rain. They just stood there, getting drenched, occasionally wandering a few steps in one direction or another. The rain didn't slow them down or drive them away. It was another data point in my growing understanding of what they were. The storm also brought a breakthrough on the radio. Between cracks of thunder, I heard a clear transmission on one of the emergency frequencies, a woman's voice, professional and calm. This is Sarah Chen broadcasting from a remote survival location, approximately 60 miles northwest of Millbrook. If anyone is receiving this, please respond. I'm trying to establish a network of outbreak survivors. Share your location and status. We need to know who's still out there. I grabbed my radio so fast I nearly dropped it. This is David Carter. I'm at Cell Tower Site 7, about 40 miles from Millbrook. I'm trapped on the tower. Infected at the base. Limited supplies. Can you help? Static. Then her voice came back, tinged with surprise. David, you're on the cell tower, the big one on the ridge. Yes, I was doing repairs when the outbreak started. I've been stuck here for 10 days. A pause. Jesus. Okay, David, I'm marking your location. I can't promise immediate help, but I'm keeping a log of survivors. What's your supply situation? I gave her the rundown. Food nearly gone. Water situation improved thanks to the rain. No immediate medical issues, but deteriorating morale. Understood, Sarah said. I'm going to be honest with you, David. Rescue operations aren't happening. Nobody's coming to get you. But if you can hang on, I'm working on establishing a safe haven for survivors. It's going to take time. Weeks, maybe months. Can you last that long? I looked at my meager supplies, at the infected below, at the vast, empty sky above. I don't know, I admitted, but I'll try. That's all any of us can do. I'll check this frequency every day at noon and 6 p.m. Keep me updated on your status. And David, you're not alone. There are others out there. We are going to survive this. The transmission ended, and I sat in the rain, feeling something I hadn't felt in days: hope. Sarah became my lifeline over the following weeks. Her daily broadcasts were the only human contact I had, the only reminder that I wasn't the last person alive in a dead world. She told me about other survivors she'd contacted, a family hiding in a farmhouse, a group of mechanics who'd fortified a garage, a doctor broadcasting medical information from a barricaded clinic. She also shared information about the zombie outbreak itself. The infection had spread globally within the first week. Major cities had fallen within days. The military response had slowed the spread in some areas, but ultimately failed to contain it. Current estimates suggested that 70 to 80% of the global population was either dead or infected. The world we knew is gone, Sarah said during one broadcast. This is the post-apocalypse now. We have to accept that and adapt. I adapted by becoming intimately familiar with every inch of that tower. I'd climbed it plenty of times before, but now I studied it with a survivor's eye. I learned which sections of the structure caught the most sunlight for warmth. I found sheltered spots where I could escape the worst of the wind. I discovered that the tower's lattice structure actually created updrafts that could be used to dry wet clothes. I also improved my living situation as much as possible given the constraints. I'd brought up a small tarp during the rainstorm and rigged it into a crude tent on the platform, giving me some shelter from the weather. I organized my remaining supplies with obsessive precision. I created a routine of exercise to keep my muscles from atrophying, carefully, given the limited space and the deadly trop on all sides. Food remained my biggest problem. By the third week, I was completely out. I'd stretched those protein bars and trail mix as far as they could go, but there's only so much you can do with limited supplies. I was losing weight, feeling weaker each day. The hunger was becoming unbearable. That's when I started seriously considering the impossible. I needed to get down to my truck. I spent days planning it, studying the infected's patterns, looking for any opportunity. The number of infected around the tower had grown to nearly a dozen. Word had apparently spread, or whatever passed for communication among those things, that there was prey up here. They congregated around the base, weighing with inhuman patience. But I noticed something useful. Around mid-afternoon, when the sun was at its hottest and brightest, most of them would drift away to find shade. They never all left at once, but the numbers would drop to maybe 3 or 4. It wasn't much, but it was something. On day 23rd, I made my move. I waited until the afternoon lull, then started my descent. I'd prepared everything I could. I was wearing my climbing harness with extra safety lines. I had a heavy wrench as a weapon, and I'd plotted the fastest route to my truck and back. Get down, grab food and water, get back up. 2 minutes, maybe 3. That was the plan. The descent seemed to take forever. Every movement felt too loud. Every breath seemed to echo off the metal. I kept expecting the infected to surge toward the tower, but they didn't. The few remaining ones wandered aimlessly in the distance, not looking up. I reached the ground and ran to my truck. The driver's door was already open. I'd left in such a hurry that first day that I hadn't locked it. Inside, the cab was exactly as I'd left it. Work orders on the dash, coffee cup in the holder, supply bag in the passenger seat. It was like looking at a photograph from a different world. I grabbed the bag and started filling it with anything useful. Canned food from the emergency box, water bottles, batteries, a spare radio, the first aid kit.
My hands were shaking so badly I could barely grip anything. That's when I heard the sound behind me. One of the infected had noticed me. It was making that wet, gurgling moan they all made, and the sound was bringing others. I could see them emerging from the tree line, at least 6 of them, moving with that horrible, jerky gait toward the truck. I ran. The infected were faster than I thought. Not fast like a running human, but faster than their usual shambling walk. They seemed to enter a more aggressive state once they'd spotted prey. One of them got close enough that I could smell it, a nauseating mix of decay and something chemical, like old pennies. I reached the tower and started climbing, the supply bag slung over my shoulder, my hands finding the familiar holds more through muscle memory than conscious thought. Below me, the infected reached the base and started their reaching, grasping behavior, those sounds coming from their throats. One of them grabbed my boot. I kicked down hard, felt my heel connect with something that gave way with a wet crunch. The grip released, and I scrambled higher, not stopping until I was at least 100 feet up. Only then did I risk looking down. The infected were gathered at the base, more than I'd ever seen, at least 20 of them now, drawn by the commotion. They'd be there for hours, maybe days. But I had made it. I had food. I had water. I'd bought myself more time. I finished the climb to my platform and collapsed, my whole body shaking with adrenaline and terror. It was the closest I'd come to being infected, and it would be a long time before I attempted anything that stupid again. The supplies I'd recovered lasted almost 2 weeks. I rationed them carefully, making each can of food stretch as far as possible. I also started supplementing my diet in ways I'd never have considered before the zombie outbreak. Birds occasionally landed on the tower structure, and I learned that if I stayed very still, I could sometimes grab them. It wasn't much meat, but protein was protein. I also discovered that certain types of insects were attracted to the equipment lights at night. Roasted over a small fire made from broken branches I'd pulled up with a rope, they were barely edible but provided calories. Sarah's daily broadcasts evolved over this time. What started as simple survivor check-ins became something more organized. She was building a network, a loose community of outbreak survivors who shared information, resources, and support. I learned about safe havens being established in remote areas. I heard about supply caches that people had hidden for others to find. I discovered that some groups were actively working to understand the infection, trying to find patterns or weaknesses. One broadcast in particular stood out. It came from someone calling himself Marcus, transmitting from somewhere in the state. "I've been studying these things for weeks now," Marcus said, his voice clinical and detached. "The infected aren't mindless. They have intelligence, just not human intelligence anymore. They hunt in groups. They remember locations where they've found prey, and they're learning. I've watched the same group of infected figure out how to open unlocked doors. It took them days of trial and error, but they did it. Whatever this infection is, it doesn't just destroy the brain, it rewires it into something else, something designed to spread. This information was both useful and terrifying. It meant the infected weren't going to stay dumb. They were going to get more dangerous over time. I applied this knowledge to my own situation. If the infected could learn, then I needed to be unpredictable. I varied my routine, changed when I made noise, altered my movements on the tower.
I also became more careful about what I dropped or discarded. Every object that fell to the ground was a marker of my presence, a reminder to the infected that prey was above them. By the end of my first month on the tower, I'd established a sustainable, if deeply uncomfortable, existence. I had water from rainfall collection. I had minimal food from birds and insects, supplemented by the occasional supply run when the infected numbers dropped. I had shelter from my tarp tent. I had communication through the radio. And I had purpose, because giving up meant dying, and I wasn't ready for that. But the isolation was getting to me. I started talking to myself, not just thinking out loud, but having full conversations with myself, debating decisions, arguing about the best way to set up the rain collection system, or whether it was worth the risk to climb down again. I named the equipment on the platform. The main antenna became Big Red, the backup battery system was Juicebox, the solar panels were the Sun Crew. I also started keeping a more detailed survival journal, filling page after page with observations, thoughts, and fears. Writing helped me feel human. It was proof that I still existed, that I still thought, that I hadn't become like the infected below. Some entries were practical, documenting weather patterns and infected behavior. Others were more personal, confessions of fear and loneliness that I could never voice over the radio. One entry from day 38 read, "I wonder if the infected remember who they were. When they're standing at the base of the tower, reaching up, are they still people somewhere in there? Or is the person completely gone, replaced by this new thing? I hope it's the latter. I hope death comes quickly when you're bitten, that you don't have to watch yourself become a monster. I can't imagine a worse fate than being trapped in your own body while it does horrible things." The question became moot on day 40 when I witnessed my first infected death. One of them, I think it was the same one that had grabbed my boot weeks earlier, started showing signs of deterioration. It moved slower than the others, its movements becoming more erratic. Over the course of several days, I watched it break down. The infection apparently didn't make the body immortal, just repurposed it. Eventually, the infected collapsed and didn't get back up. The others showed no interest in it, just walked past the corpse without reaction. Nature reclaimed it quickly. Within days, scavengers had reduced it to bones. The infected didn't interfere with this process either. They really did only care about living prey. This observation led to a grim calculation. If the infected eventually broke down, then theoretically, I just had to outlast them. Of course, that could take months or years, and new infected could always appear. But it was something approaching hope. Around day 50, I had my first real conversation with another survivor besides Sarah. I was monitoring the radio during the afternoon when I heard a new voice, male, young, speaking with a slight accent. "Is anyone near the old cell tower outside Millbrook? I'm trying to reach someone named David. Sarah Chen said he might still be alive up there." I nearly dropped the radio in my rush to respond. "This is David? Who is this?" "Thank God. My name's Javier. I'm with a group about 30 miles south of your position. Sarah's been coordinating survivors, and we're trying to map safe routes between locations. She mentioned you were stuck on a tower. That true?" "Very true. Been here almost 2 months now. Can't get down safely with all the infected at the base." "How many infected are we talking about?" I did a quick count of the figures I could see below. Maybe 15 right now, but the number fluctuates. "More show up when I make noise." Javier was quiet for a moment. "Okay, here's the thing. My group has been clearing infected from key locations. We've gotten pretty good at it. We could potentially help you, but we'd need something in return." My heart rate spiked. "What do you need?" "That tower you're on, it's still operational, right? We've been trying to establish a communication network between survivor groups, but most of the cell infrastructure is dead. If we could access that tower, use it as a relay station, it would let us coordinate across a much wider area." We bring communication equipment, secure the site, and you get rescued. Everyone wins. It sounded too good to be true, and in the post-apocalypse, if something sounds too good to be true, it usually is. But what choice did I have? How would this work? I asked. We'd need to scout the area first, figure out the best approach. Then we'd come in with enough people to handle the infected and secure the tower base. Once it's clear, you could come down, and we'd set up the relay equipment. You'd be free to join our group or go your own way. When could you do this? Not immediately. We need to finish securing our current location first. Maybe 2 weeks? I'll coordinate with Sarah and keep you updated. After Javier signed off, I felt a strange mix of emotions. Hope, obviously. The idea of getting off this tower was intoxicating. But also fear. I'd been alone for so long that the idea of interacting with people again felt alien. And there was something else, a nagging doubt. Why did Javier's group need this specific tower? There were other cell sites in the region. What made this one so valuable? I pushed the doubt aside. I needed to believe that rescue was possible. The alternative was accepting that I'd die on this platform. I shared the development with Sarah during her next broadcast. Her response was cautiously optimistic. Javier's group is solid, she said. I've been working with them for a few weeks now. They're organized and they have resources. If they say they can clear the infected and get you out, I believe them. But David, you need to understand something. The post-apocalypse isn't like the old world. People help each other, but there's always a price. Make sure you're comfortable with what they're asking before you agree to anything. They just want to use the tower for communications, I said. That seems reasonable. It is. Just be careful. Keep your options open, and keep this frequency clear. I want to know what's happening. Over the next 2 weeks, I prepared for the possibility of rescue. I packed the few possessions I had, organized the tower equipment into a state where someone else could maintain it, and mentally prepared myself for life on the ground again. Javier checked in every few days with updates. His group was gathering supplies, planning routes, preparing for the operation. He asked detailed questions about the tower layout, the number of infected, the surrounding terrain. I answered everything honestly. I wanted this to work. On day 63, Javier announced they were ready to move. We're heading out tomorrow morning, he said. Should reach your position by late afternoon. Stay off the radio during our approach. We don't want to draw infected toward us with extra noise. Once we're in position, I'll signal you. Then stay on the tower until we give the all clear. This is going to get loud. That night, I barely slept. I kept imagining what it would be like to touch solid ground again, to walk more than 10 feet in any direction, to eat real food. The infected below seemed more agitated than usual, as if they sensed something was about to change. The next day crawled by. I watched the sun track across the sky, marking the hours. Every distant sound made me think Javier's group was arriving, but the afternoon wore on with no sign of them. Then, around 4 p.m., I saw vehicles approaching on the access road. 3 trucks, moving fast, kicking up dust. They stopped about 200 yards from the tower, well outside the infected's immediate range. I could see people climbing out, maybe 8 or 9 of them, carrying what looked like weapons and equipment. My radio crackled. "David, this is Javier. We're in position, about to make some noise to draw the infected toward us. Stay on the tower, no matter what you see or hear. Understood?" "Understood. Be careful." "Always are. Stand by." What happened next was efficient, brutal, and terrifying. Javier's group set up a perimeter using the trucks as barriers. Then they started making noise, banging on metal, shouting, even firing a few shots into the air. The infected around the tower base immediately responded, moving toward the sound with that horrible, focused aggression they showed when prey was nearby. Once the infected were away from the tower, the real work began. Javier's people used a combination of firearms and melee weapons to eliminate the infected systematically. They worked in pairs, one person drawing an infected's attention, while another struck from behind or the side. It wasn't like in movies where a single headshot drops them instantly. These things kept moving even with massive trauma, requiring multiple hits to finally stop. I watched from my platform, simultaneously grateful for the rescue and horrified by the violence. Each infected that fell had been a person once. The thing that grabbed my boot might have been a father, a teacher, someone's best friend. The infection had stolen their humanity, but seeing them destroyed still felt wrong somehow. The operation took about 40 minutes. When it was over, 15 infected lay motionless around the tower base, and Javier's group was regrouping. "David, you're clear to descend," Javier called up. "Take your time. We've got the area secured." I gathered my few possessions, took one last look at the platform that had been my prison and sanctuary for more than 2 months, and started down. The descent felt surreal. My hands found the familiar holds automatically, but every step felt like leaving safety behind. The ground rushed up to meet me, solid and strange after so long viewing it from above. When my boots finally touched earth, my legs nearly gave out. I'd grown so accustomed to the small platform that the vast open space felt wrong. Javier approached, hand extended. He was maybe 30, lean and weathered, with dark eyes that assessed me quickly. "You look like hell, man. When's the last time you had a real meal?" "Depends on your definition of real," I said, shaking his hand. "I've been eating birds and bugs." He laughed, though there wasn't much humor in it. "Well, we've got actual food in the trucks. Come on, let's get you fed, and then we can talk business." The other members of Javier's group were equally welcoming in that cautious way of post-apocalypse survivors. They'd learned not to trust too easily, but they also understood the value of cooperation. I met Marcus. Yes, the same Marcus who'd broadcast about the infected's intelligence, a heavy-set man with a background in biology. There was Elena, a former police officer who seemed to be the group's tactical leader. Chen, a mechanic who kept their vehicles running, and others, each with skills that contributed to the group's survival. They'd set up a temporary camp around the trucks, and someone handed me a can of soup that had been heated over a portable stove. It was the best thing I'd ever tasted. I forced myself to eat slowly, knowing my stomach would rebel if I ate too fast after months of near starvation. While I ate, Javier explained the situation. His group had established a safe haven in a fortified farm about 40 miles south. They had supplies, defenses, and a growing community of outbreak survivors. The cell tower would let them communicate with other survivor groups across the region, coordinate supply runs, and warn each other about infected movements. "We'd like you to come back with us," Javier said. "We can always use people with technical skills. You know this tower inside and out, and we'll need someone to maintain the equipment." It was a generous offer, too generous. That nagging doubt returned. "What's the catch?" I asked. Javier didn't seem offended by the question. If anything, he looked approving. "The catch is that survival isn't free anymore. Everyone contributes. You'd be expected to work, to help with defenses, to pull your weight. And resources are shared. No personal stockpiles, no hoarding. Everything goes into the common supply. Can you live with that?" I thought about it. After 2 months alone on a tower, the idea of being part of a community was appealing. But giving up autonomy, putting my survival in others' hands, that was harder to accept. "Can I think about it?" "Take your time. We're staying here tonight anyway. We need to set up the relay equipment and make sure the tower's secure. Give you a chance to rest, recover, and decide what you want to do." That night, I slept on the ground for the first time in months. It felt wrong. Being so low, so vulnerable, I kept waking up, convinced that infected were nearby. But Javier's group had set up a watch rotation, and the area was truly secure. In the morning, I helped install the relay equipment. It felt good to use my technical skills for something beyond basic survival. The tower's existing infrastructure made it perfect for what they needed.
Within a few hours, we had a communication hub that could reach for miles in every direction. I was testing the system when Sarah's voice came through, clear and strong. "Is this the tower relay? Who am I speaking with?" "Sarah, it's David. We're operational." "David, thank God. I heard Javier's group was extracting you. Are you okay?" "Physically, I'm recovering. Mentally, I'm not sure yet. But I'm alive. That counts for something." "It counts for everything. Listen, I've been coordinating with multiple survivor groups, and there's something you need to know."
We're seeing increased infected activity across the region, not just random wandering, organized movement, groups of them traveling together toward populated areas, like they're searching for survivors. I don't know if they're being drawn to noise, following some instinct, or if it's something else, but everyone needs to be careful. This was troubling news. Does Javier know? I'll make sure he does. But David, I wanted to talk to you specifically. You spent months observing the infected from that tower. Did you see anything that might explain this behavior? I thought back to my survival journal, all those observations I'd recorded. They definitely showed signs of coordination. They'd gather in groups around the tower. Sometimes they'd all leave at once, like they'd received some signal I couldn't perceive. And the numbers kept growing. At first, there were only a few, but by the end, there were 15 to 20 at any given time. It was like they were being drawn to my presence, even though I was way above them. That matches what we're seeing elsewhere. Safe havens that have been quiet for weeks are suddenly getting swarmed. It's like the infected are actively hunting for survivor populations. We talked for a few more minutes, sharing information and theories. After the conversation ended, I sat with the radio, thinking about the implications. The tower had protected me from the infected, but it had also made me visible. Every survivor camp, every safe haven, every fortified position was like a beacon drawing the infected toward it. Safety was an illusion in the post-apocalypse. I decided to stay with Javier's group, at least temporarily. The alternative was striking out on my own, and after months of isolation, I wasn't ready for that. We packed up the camp and began the journey south to their safe haven. The drive was jarring. The roads were littered with abandoned vehicles. Some crashed, others simply stopped in the middle of the street, as if their drivers had just walked away. We passed through a small town that had been completely overrun. Infected wandered the streets, paying no attention to our trucks as we drove by. Javier explained that they'd learned to keep quiet and move quickly. The infected would chase vehicles if they made too much noise, but a car moving at normal speed didn't trigger their hunting behavior. We reached the farm by late afternoon. It was exactly what Javier had described, a fortified position with high fences, guard towers, and cleared fields providing good visibility. There were maybe 30 people living there, a mix of survivors who'd found each other in the aftermath of the zombie outbreak. The next few weeks were an adjustment. I'd grown so accustomed to solitude that being around people constantly felt overwhelming. The noise, the conversations, the constant activity, it was too much sometimes. I'd find myself climbing to high places, seeking the isolation I'd known on the tower. Old habits die hard. But I also rediscovered what I'd lost during those months alone: human connection. I worked alongside Chen to maintain the farm's generator and solar panels. I taught others how to repair radio equipment. I shared my observations about the infected with Marcus, who was compiling a comprehensive survival guide. I also continued my survival journal, though the entries became less desperate and more reflective. One entry from my third week at the farm read, "I thought the tower was a prison, but maybe it was a sanctuary. Up there, I only had to worry about my own survival. Down here, I'm responsible for others, and they're responsible for me. It's both comforting and terrifying. If I fail, I don't just die. I might take others with me. But if they fail, I might survive because of their sacrifice. This is what community means in the post-apocalypse. Shared risk, shared survival. The farm operated on a strict routine. Everyone had assigned tasks: maintaining defenses, growing food, gathering supplies, standing watch. It was exhausting, but purposeful. We were building something, not just surviving, but trying to create a sustainable existence in this new world. The radio relay at the cell tower proved invaluable. Through it, we maintained contact with Sarah and dozens of other survivor groups. We shared information about infected movements, safe routes, supply locations. We warned each other about dangers and offered help when possible. But we also learned about failures, groups that had gone silent, safe havens that had been overrun, survivors who'd ventured out and never returned. For every success story, there were 3 tragedies. 2 months after joining Javier's group, we received a distress call that would change everything. It came late at night, patched through the tower relay, a man's voice, panicked and desperate. "This is anyone listening. We are under attack. Repeat, under attack. Not infected, people, raiders. They're trying to take our supplies. If anyone can help, we're at the old Henderson farm, about 20 miles northeast of Millbrook. Please, they're killing." The transmission cut off. Javier gathered the group's leadership: Elena, Marcus, Chen, and a few others. I was included because of my knowledge of the area around the tower. "We have to help them," Elena said immediately. "That's what we do. We're not animals." "We're also not a military," Marcus countered. "We have limited weapons, limited people. If we go in against raiders, we could lose everything." Javier looked troubled. "David, you know that area."
"What can you tell us about the Henderson farm?" I pulled up a mental map. It's in a valley, surrounded by hills. Good for defense, but also easy to trap. If raiders have it surrounded, getting in and out would be risky. What about infected presence? When I was on the tower, that area had moderate infected activity. Not overrun, but not clear either. Anyone making noise would draw them. The group debated for hours. The ethical answer was to help, but the practical answer was to preserve our own safety. In the old world, this would have been a simple choice. In the post-apocalypse, simple choices no longer existed. Finally, Javier made a decision. We'll send a small group to scout the situation. Not a rescue mission, just reconnaissance. If we can help without risking everything, we will. David, I want you with us. You know the area, and we might need someone who can work the tower relay if we need backup communications. The scouting party left at dawn. Javier, Elena, Chen, 2 others named Rob and Jennifer, and me. 6 people in 2 trucks armed with whatever weapons we'd salvaged. It felt inadequate for what we might face. The drive to the Henderson farm took 3 hours, navigating back roads and avoiding infected. As we got closer, we started seeing signs of recent activity: fresh tire tracks, spent shell casings, blood on the pavement. We stopped about a mile from the farm and approached on foot. What we found was worse than expected. The farm had been fortified, much like our own base, but the defenses had been breached. Bodies lay in the yard. I couldn't tell if they were survivors or raiders. The buildings showed signs of fire, and the infected were there, dozens of them, drawn by the noise and violence. They wandered through the carnage, occasionally stopping to feed on the dead. "Jesus," Chen whispered. "We're too late." Elena scanned the area with binoculars. "I don't see any living people. Raiders are probably long gone, grabbed what they could and left." "Should we check for survivors?" Rob asked. Javier was about to answer when we heard it, a child crying. The sound came from one of the buildings, a barn on the far side of the farm. We could see infected converging on it, drawn by the noise. "We have to move now," Elena said.
That kid doesn't have much time. The rescue operation was hasty and chaotic. We created a distraction, drawing some of the infected away from the barn using noise from one of our trucks. While they were distracted, Elena, Rob, and I ran to the barn. Inside, we found 3 survivors, 2 children, maybe 8 and 10 years old, and their mother, who was badly injured. The woman had been shot during the raider attack and had lost a lot of blood. "Please," she gasped when she saw us, "save my kids, please." We didn't have time for careful planning.
Rob picked up the younger child, I took the older one, and Elena supported the mother. We ran back toward our trucks while Javier and the others provided cover. An infected grabbed my arm as we ran. I felt its cold fingers dig into my jacket, that horrible strength they possessed when hunting. The child I was parrying screamed. I spun and kicked, breaking the infected's grip, and kept running. We made it to the trucks and drove away from the Henderson farm, with infected pursuing us for the first few miles. Only when we were clear did we stop to assess the damage. The mother was dying. Even with our limited medical supplies, it was obvious she wouldn't survive the trip back. She knew it too. "Take care of them," she told Elena, gripping her hand with bloody fingers. "They're good kids. Don't let them become like those things." She died 20 minutes later. We buried her beside the road, marking the grave with stones. The children, Tommy and Sarah, we learned, watched in numb silence. They'd already lived through the zombie outbreak, the raider attack, and now their mother's death. Too much trauma for anyone, let alone kids. We brought them back to the farm. Javier's group absorbed them without question. In the post-apocalypse, children were precious. They represented the possibility that humanity might continue. But the raider attack raised serious concerns. We'd known that other survivor groups existed, some friendly and some not, but this was the first time we'd seen organized violence between survivors. The raiders hadn't just taken supplies, they'd killed people who could have been allies. Sarah's next broadcast confirmed our fears. "I'm getting reports from multiple locations about raider groups. They're targeting established safe havens, taking supplies and resources. Some are former military, some are just opportunists who've decided that taking is easier than building. Everyone needs to improve their defenses." Over the following weeks, we did exactly that. The farm's defenses were upgraded with additional fencing, more guard positions, and better early warning systems. We established protocols for identifying approaching vehicles and people. We created hidden supply caches in case we had to evacuate quickly. I spent much of this time working on communication systems. Through the tower relay, I helped create a network of survivor groups who agreed to share information about raider activity. It wasn't perfect. Some groups refused to participate, worried about revealing their locations, but it was better than nothing. I also made regular trips back to the cell tower to maintain the equipment and check on the site. On one of these trips, about 4 months after my rescue, I discovered something troubling. Someone else had been there. The signs were subtle: disturbed equipment, fresh footprints in the dust, supplies that had been moved. Whoever it was had been careful, but not careful enough. They'd accessed the relay equipment, possibly copying our communication frequencies. I reported this to Javier immediately. Someone knows about the tower, knows what we're using it for, and has the technical knowledge to access our systems. Raiders? Javier asked. Possibly, or another survivor group that's keeping quiet. Either way, we have a security problem. They can listen to all our communications. We implemented new security protocols, encrypted messages, code words, frequent frequency changes. It was a constant game of cat and mouse, trying to stay ahead of whoever was monitoring us. The answer came 2 weeks later when a convoy of vehicles approached the farm. They arrived at dusk, 3 military trucks and several civilian vehicles, carrying maybe 20 people. They stopped outside our fence and waited, making no aggressive moves. A woman stepped out of the lead truck, hands raised to show she was unarmed. "My name is Captain Lisa Morrison," she called out. "I'm looking for David Carter. I believe he's here." I stepped forward, confused. "I'm David Carter."
"How do you know my name?" "Because I've been monitoring your radio transmissions from the cell tower, and because I need your help." Javier and Elena joined me at the fence, weapons ready but not aimed. "What kind of help?" Javier asked. Morrison lowered her hand slowly. "I represent a coalition of survivor groups trying to establish safe havens across the region. We've been operating quietly, trying to avoid attracting raiders or large infected hordes. Your communication network has been helpful for tracking both threats." "You've been spying on us," Elena said flatly. "Yes."
"I apologize for that, but these are desperate times. I'm here now because we're facing a situation that requires your specific expertise, Mr. Carter." She explained the problem. The coalition had established a major safe haven in a secured facility about 100 miles away. They had several hundred survivors, good defenses, and supply lines, but their communication systems had failed, and they couldn't reach their outlying groups. Without communications, the entire coalition could collapse. "We need someone who understands cellular infrastructure," Morrison said.
"Someone who can assess what's wrong and fix it. Your work keeping that tower operational impressed us. We're asking for your help." It felt like a trap. Every instinct honed by months of survival screamed at me to refuse. But Morrison's offer was compelling. In exchange for my help, her coalition would provide supplies, security support, and information to our group. And if her coalition was real, it represented something larger than scattered survivor camps, actual organized resistance to the collapse. Javier pulled me aside. "Your call, David. We won't force you. But if you go, take some of our people with you. Don't go alone." I agreed to help, with conditions. Chen and Rob would come with me, we'd take one of our trucks, and we'd maintain radio contact with the farm throughout the trip. Morrison accepted these terms without argument, which either meant she was genuine or very confident in her ability to control the situation. The journey to the coalition's safe haven took 2 days. We traveled in convoy with Morrison's group, stopping each night to set up defensive camps. Along the way, Morrison explained more about the coalition. They'd formed in the early weeks of the zombie outbreak, when it became clear that government response had failed. Military personnel, emergency workers, and civilian leaders had come together to create organized survivor communities. They'd avoided using radio communications extensively because they didn't want to attract attention, but now the lack of coordination was causing problems. The safe haven itself was impressive. They'd fortified an old industrial complex, using the existing buildings and fences as the foundation for a defensible position. Guard towers, reinforced gates, cleared kill zones around the perimeter. It was far more sophisticated than anything our farm had. And the people, hundreds of them, going about daily tasks with something approaching normalcy. Children attended makeshift schools, adults worked in organized shifts. There was even a medical clinic with actual doctors. For the first time since the zombie outbreak, I saw what a functioning community could look like in the post-apocalypse. The communications problem was in the complex's central building. They'd tried to set up a radio system using salvaged equipment, but something was wrong with the power supply. It took me 3 days of diagnostics to find the issue, a faulty voltage regulator that was causing cascading failures throughout the system. "We don't have a replacement part," the coalition's technical lead told me, a nervous young man named Peter. "Then we'll build one," I said. "Chen, we need to strip components from other equipment. Rob, find me anything with similar voltage specifications." It was challenging work, requiring improvisation and creativity. But it was also satisfying in a way I hadn't experienced since before the outbreak. I wasn't just surviving, I was solving problems, contributing something meaningful. After a week of work, we had the system operational. The coalition could now communicate with all their outlying groups, coordinate supply runs, and warn each other about threats. Morrison was genuinely grateful. "You've done more than fix our radios," she said. "You've given us a chance to build something lasting. I hope you'll consider staying. We could use someone with your skills permanently." It was tempting. The coalition offered stability, safety, and purpose. But I thought about Javier's group, about the farm, about the community I'd become part of. They'd rescued me from the tower when they didn't have to. I owed them my loyalty. "I appreciate the offer," I told Morrison, "but I have a home, people who depend on me. I need to get back." She nodded, understanding. "Then let me make a different offer. Your group joins the coalition. You maintain your independence, keep your leadership structure, but coordinate with us for mutual support. Share intelligence, resources when possible, help each other survive." I couldn't make that decision alone. I contacted Javier via radio and explained the situation. After a long discussion with his leadership group, they agreed to consider the offer, but wanted to meet with Morrison directly first. We arranged for that meeting back at the farm. Morrison and a small delegation would visit, tour our facilities, and discuss terms. It felt like diplomacy from the old world, strange and formal in the post-apocalypse context. But before that meeting could happen, everything fell apart. I was preparing to leave the coalition's safe haven when the attack began. Not raiders, infected. Hundreds of them, maybe thousands, moving toward the complex in a coordinated wave. "Jesus Christ," Morrison said, staring at the surveillance monitors. "Where did they all come from?" Marcus Asperi about the infected learning and coordinating had been right. They'd been drawn to the concentration of survivors, had gathered in the surrounding area, and were now moving as one massive group toward the complex. Every able-bodied person rushed to the defenses. The infected hit the perimeter like a breaking wave, pressing against the fences with overwhelming force. We fired until our weapons ran hot, dropped them and picked up melee weapons, fought until our arms ached. The infected kept coming. One section of fence collapsed under the pressure. Infected poured through the gap. The defensive line fell back to the buildings, fighting room by room. Screams filled the air. The medical clinic was overrun within minutes. I found myself separated from Chen and Rob, trapped in a storage building with a dozen other survivors. We barricaded the doors, but we could hear the infected outside, that horrible wet sound they made, the impact of bodies throwing themselves against the walls. "We need to get to the roof," someone said. We climbed to the top of the building using internal stairs. From there, I could see the full scope of the disaster. The complex was being overwhelmed. Buildings were on fire. Infected filled the courtyards. Survivors were scattered, isolated, being hunted. The cell tower had saved me before. Height was safety. "We need to get to high ground," I told the others. "Above the infected. That's the only way we survive." We used the rooftops to move between buildings, staying above the infected horde. It was slow, dangerous work. One wrong jump meant falling into the mass below. But we made it to the complex's tallest structure, a 6-story administrative building that was still mostly secure. From there, we used radios to coordinate with other survivors who'd had the same idea. Across the complex, groups had retreated to upper floors and rooftops, effectively turning the safe haven into a series of isolated towers. Morrison was alive, holed up in the command center with about 40 people. Chen had made it to a warehouse with a group of coalition defenders. Rob was in the medical building with wounded survivors. But we were trapped. The infected controlled the ground level completely. Hundreds of them filled the complex, wandering through buildings, searching for prey. Any attempt to descend would mean certain death. I knew this situation. I'd lived it for months on the cell tower, and I knew that eventually we'd run out of supplies and be forced to make impossible choices. Over the radio, Morrison's voice was defeated. "This is my fault. We got too big, too visible.
We drew them here. It's not your fault, I said. It's the nature of the post-apocalypse. Anywhere we gather, anywhere we try to build something, we create a target. The infected are drawn to us because we're the last remaining prey. So what do we do? Wait to starve? Fight our way out and watch everyone die? I thought about my time on the tower, about the observations I'd made, the patterns I'd noticed. The infected don't coordinate perfectly.
They respond to stimuli, but not with unified planning. If we create enough distraction, split their attention, we might be able to evacuate in groups. We developed a plan. Using vehicles with remote starters and timers, we'd create noise and movement on one side of the complex. While the infected converged there, groups of survivors would evacuate from the opposite side. It was risky, but it was better than waiting to die. The evacuation took 3 days to organize and execute. We lost people. Some groups got cut off. Some vehicles failed. Some distractions didn't draw enough infected away, but slowly we got survivors out of the complex and to fallback positions. I was in one of the last groups to evacuate. Chen, Rob, and I made it out with Morrison and about 15 others. We watched from a distant hill as the complex burned, set a light deliberately to destroy any supplies we couldn't take. The infected would have nothing useful when they finally dispersed. The coalition's central safe haven was gone, but Morrison refused to give up. We rebuild, she said, smaller, more distributed. We've learned our lesson about concentrating too many people in one place. We returned to the farm to find it had faced its own crisis while we were gone. A raider group had attempted an attack but been repelled. 2 members of Javier's group had died in the fighting. The farm was shaken but intact. Javier listened to my report about the coalition's collapse with a grim expression. So gathering together in large numbers is a death sentence, but staying isolated means we can't share resources or defend against raiders. We're damned either way. Maybe not, I said. The tower model worked. Distributed positions with communication networks between them, small groups that can support each other without creating obvious targets. It's not perfect, but it's something. Over the following months, that became the new model. Morrison's coalition reorganized into a network of small safe havens, each with 20 to 30 people, spread across the region. They maintained contact through the communication systems I helped establish, using the cell tower and other relay points. Our farm became one node in this network. We shared information, traded supplies when possible, and coordinated responses to threats. It wasn't the rebuilding of civilization. That was probably generations away, if it ever happened at all, but it was sustainable survival. I continued maintaining the cell tower, making regular trips to check the equipment. Each time I climbed that structure, I remembered the months I'd spent trapped on the platform, watching the world end. The tower had been my prison and my salvation. It had kept me alive, but cost me my innocence about what survival in the post-apocalypse truly meant. My survival journal from this period became less about day-to-day survival and more philosophical. One entry read, "We're not trying to return to the old world. That's gone forever. The zombie outbreak didn't just kill billions of people, it killed the entire structure of civilization. What we're building now is something different, smaller, more fragile, but also more resilient in some ways. We can't be overrun because we're not gathered in one place. We can't be completely destroyed because we're connected to others who will carry on. Is this the future of humanity? Networks of survivors, communicating across distances, helping each other just enough to keep everyone alive? Maybe. Or maybe this is just a transition phase until something else emerges. I don't know. All I know is that right now, today, we're surviving. And tomorrow, we'll try to do it again. A year after the zombie outbreak began, Sarah organized a gathering of survivor groups at a neutral location. About 50 people attended, representing a dozen different communities. It was strange seeing so many people in one place again, but also encouraging. We weren't alone.
Humanity was still fighting. During that gathering, I met other survivors who'd had experiences similar to mine. A woman who'd been trapped in a radio station for months, a man who'd survived in a lighthouse, a family that had barricaded themselves on an upper floor of an apartment building. We'd all found variations on the same solution: height, isolation, and patience. We shared our survival journals, comparing notes and observations about the infected. Patterns were emerging. The infected seemed to be declining in overall numbers as their bodies broke down.
But they were also becoming more coordinated, showing signs of adaptation. Some groups reported infected working together to break through barriers or trap prey. "They're evolving," Marcus said during one discussion, "or the infection is. It's optimizing for survival and spread, just like any successful parasite." "So they'll get more dangerous?" someone asked. "Different dangerous, but also there are fewer of them over time. The question is whether they'll die off faster than they can adapt, and whether we can survive long enough to find out." I thought about the infected I'd watched from the tower, the ones I'd observed for months. They'd been dangerous, but predictable. If they were changing, becoming smarter, then the strategies we'd developed might stop working. The post-apocalypse wasn't getting easier, it was just becoming a different kind of difficult. But we were adapting too. Human beings are remarkably resilient. Give us a problem, even one as catastrophic as a zombie outbreak, and we'll find ways to survive. Not all of us, not even most of us, but enough. 2 years after the outbreak, I made my final trip to the cell tower. The equipment was still functioning, still serving as a communication relay, but it needed significant repairs that would take weeks to complete. I decided to base myself there temporarily, just like old times. Climbing that tower felt like coming home. The platforms were exactly as I remembered them, though weathered by 2 years of exposure. I set up a more comfortable camp than my original desperate survival situation. I had supplies, food, a proper tent, and communication equipment. I wasn't trapped anymore. I was choosing to be there. At night, I could see lights from survivor camps scattered across the valley. Small fires and generator-powered buildings, tiny points of warmth in the darkness. Each light represented people fighting to stay alive, to maintain some sense of humanity in a world that had tried to take it away. The infected were still out there. I could see them occasionally, wandering through the darkness below, but their numbers had definitely decreased. The massive hordes that had destroyed the coalition's safe haven weren't forming anymore. The infected were becoming scattered, isolated, less of an immediate threat. The real threats now were the same ones humans had always faced: hunger, disease, violence from other survivors, the slow, grinding challenge of staying alive day after day. I worked on the tower for 3 weeks, making repairs and upgrades. During that time, I received regular radio communications from the network of survivor groups. Javier's farm was doing well, had established trade routes with other communities. Morrison's coalition had successfully reorganized into their distributed model and was slowly growing. Sarah had become something like the post-apocalypse's first radio broadcaster, coordinating information across hundreds of miles. We were building something. It wasn't the old world, and it never would be, but it was ours, forged through survival and cooperation. On my last night on the tower before heading back to the farm, I made a final entry in my survival journal. I thought being above the dead meant I was safe. I learned that safety is an illusion. The infected were never the only threat. Other survivors, resource scarcity, environmental hazards, my own mistakes, all of these could kill me just as easily as any bite. But I also learned that isolation isn't safety either. The tower kept me alive, but it was the connection to others, to Sarah, to Javier's group, to the coalition, that gave me reasons to stay alive. The zombie outbreak took the world I knew, but maybe that world needed to end.
It was built on assumptions that weren't sustainable, on systems that failed when they were truly tested. What we're building now is smaller, but it's more honest. We know survival isn't guaranteed. We know we depend on each other. We know that every day is a gift. I never realized the living would always find a way to climb, but they do. We do. Humanity climbs. It's what we've always done. And as long as we keep climbing, keep reaching upward, we have hope. I descended from the tower the next morning and drove back to the farm. The road was long and dangerous, winding through territory where infected still lurked and raiders still operated. But I knew the route. I knew the risks. And I knew people were waiting for me. The post-apocalypse was my reality now. Not a temporary crisis to survive until rescue came, but the permanent condition of existence. I'd adapted. We all had. As I drove, I monitored the radio, listening to the network of survivors communicating across the wasteland. Supply reports, infected sightings, requests for help, offers of trade. The normal conversation of the new normal world. Then, just as I was nearing the farm, I heard a transmission I didn't recognize. The voice was Nail, young, speaking with careful precision. If anyone is still listening, don't trust everyone who finds you. The signal disappeared before I could respond. I tried to trace it, to get a location or any other information, but there was nothing, just that one cryptic warning from an unknown survivor. I thought about reporting it to the network, asking if anyone else had heard it, but something made me hesitate. The post-apocalypse had taught me that information itself could be dangerous. Sometimes what you didn't know couldn't hurt you, and sometimes warnings came too late to matter. I filed the transmission away in my memory and kept driving. The farm appeared in the distance, its defensive walls visible against the horizon. Guard towers stood watch. Smoke rose from cooking fires. People moved through the compound, going about their daily survival routines. Home. I'd never thought I'd have one again, but here it was, built from desperation and determination, maintained by cooperation and constant vigilance. It wasn't much, but it was ours. And tomorrow, we'd wake up and fight to keep it for one more day, because that's what survivors do in the post-apocalypse. We climb. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more survival horror stories like this. Thanks for listening, and I'll see you in the next one.